Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Todd Christensen. I serve as the SVP of Advancement and Member Experience at CapEd Credit Union. We want to extend a warm welcome to everybody who has joined us here this afternoon on Election Day. For those that haven't had an opportunity to vote, we encourage you to do so and get out and participate in your civic duty. I have presented here on screen information that I just want to go over real quickly. We are well into our webinar series that we've titled Lunch Money, and I'm scrolling through the past sessions. Those are all available as recorded events that you can view through YouTube. So you can see Lisa Hamilton's great presentation as well as others. You can visit the page capedcu.com/lunchmoney, and then you can scroll through this page, and where it shows a YouTube link, that's where you can visit and view the previously shared webinars. Today, we are honored and very pleased to have with us, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that he'll come up on screen here. We have Toby King, CapEd's Chief Information Officer. He's waving there. He has been with CapEd, Toby, for how long? I think, what, 13 years? Is that how long you've been with CapEd?
It has been 13 years now, yes.
13 years with CapEd. He has led the IT department and the security aspects of the credit union for 13 years. A wealth of knowledge and great experience to share with us today. So I would like to welcome a warm welcome to Toby and turn the time over to him. But before we do that, let me do a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you want to pull up the chat function, and if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to ask those. We will most likely reserve those to the end in a Q&A session, and so you can share those there. Click on your chat. We also encourage you to click on the view option and do speaker view. That will allow you to see Toby in a greater size in the screen and be able to have that viewing experience. But with that, let me turn it over to you, Toby, and thank you, Toby, for being with us here today and have a conversation on cybersecurity today. And then on Thursday, if you haven't scared us enough today, then you'll give us the answers on how we can not be so frightful as we engage online in a session on Thursday on how to protect ourselves while online. So today's a great technological conversation, and I appreciate your expertise in sharing it with our membership. Toby.
Well, thank you very much, Todd, and welcome to all of you who have signed up for this lunch series, Lunch Money series. We appreciate your time, and I wanted to focus on a component of cybersecurity today, which is cyber fraud, and that really pertains more to the financial well-being. So let's get into it. I want to start with a definition of what cyber fraud is. It's the use of the internet to perpetuate financial fraud, including but not limited to phishing type emails to gather personally identifying information, or PII, from unsuspecting readers, fake items for sale in online marketplaces such as eBay or Craigslist, email scams that claim the recipient will be compensated if they perform some transaction for the sender, such as depositing a fraudulent check at the bank, phony investment schemes, and identity theft. Many of these schemes are simply online versions of fraudulent practices that have long existed in the physical world. However, the internet has allowed criminals to target individuals worldwide, as well as provide more opportunities to elude law enforcement, as they need not even be in the same country as their victims. The practice of hacking in order to obtain sensitive consumer information is carried out by those we call cyber criminals. These bad actors used to have to target one victim at a time, probing for digital vulnerabilities that might be unique to a particular website software configuration or firewall security rules. But nowadays, they can automate programs that scan every device on the internet repeatedly, looking for well-documented vulnerabilities that security researchers publish after notifying the company responsible for maintaining the software, typically giving them a grace period to provide a patch. Large companies like Apple and Microsoft actually have bug bounty programs whereby they encourage people to attempt to compromise their software, and they pay them bounties when they do find a bug and report it. But not all companies have the deep pockets to pay for such a program, and some simply aren't that proactive. Typically, when these vulnerabilities are published online, they have proof of concept code included to demonstrate how to exploit the vulnerability. Hackers will turn these how-to examples into active exploitation campaigns immediately. To mount a defense against cybercriminals attempting to compromise systems for the purpose of stealing sensitive consumer information, IT cybersecurity experts must spend a lot of money and time putting in place a multi-layered set of digital security applications to thwart these attempts. Traditionally, viruses, worms, Trojan horses, keyloggers, and other common forms of attack methods were sent as attachments via email, with the hope that some of these made their way to users' inboxes and the user would be enticed into clicking on the attachment. Over time, these attempts at sending something externally with the hope that a combination of curiosity by users and lack of proper defenses by individuals or security experts would result in a successful hit on the target have given way to a different strategy. The new goal is to trick end users into opening the door for criminals by clicking on a link that seems innocent and isn't flagged by security applications, but that opens an outbound connection to a remote server controlled by the hacker, and which can be leveraged for continued access to the affected computer. The criminals gain the trust of the eventual victim by crafting an electronic communication that looks legitimate, possibly even sent by one of the victim's own friends or relatives who in turn have had their computer or an account taken over by criminals. The most common type of attack used to commit cyber fraud is called phishing. Phishing is the fraudulent use of electronic communications in order to obtain sensitive data, such as username, passwords, and credit card details, by disguising the sender as trustworthy in the electronic communication. Typically carried out by email spoofing, which is sending email pretending to be someone else, instant messaging, or text messaging, phishing often directs users to enter personal information at a fake website which looks legitimate. Phishing is an example of social engineering techniques used to deceive users. Users are lured by communications claiming to be from trusted parties, such as social websites like Facebook or Twitter, auction sites, banks or credit unions, colleagues or executives, online payment processors, or IT administrators. A few facts here. One, it is estimated that 1 out of every 25 messages are phishing emails, and that nearly 1/3 of these are able to slip past companies' default email security measures in place. Most malicious links are hidden within benign domains, meaning the criminal has infiltrated a legitimate website due to poor security or an inherent flaw in the web server software. Thousands of phishing sites are created every month, making it next to impossible to permanently take down any particular perpetrator. The average lifespan of a phishing site is only about 15 hours. Social media sites such as Facebook are routinely used for circulating bogus websites with phishing links, enticing users with some kind of emotionally charged or often sensational headline. Another common type of cyber fraud is identity theft. Identity thieves use stolen social security numbers, email passwords, birth dates, and other personally identifying information to register for credit cards in the victim's name, file fraudulent tax returns, finance expensive purchases, etc. Identity theft has become a major problem in the US and across the globe. In the US alone, identity theft costs consumers many billions of dollars a year now. In addition to financial losses, often absorbed by the financial institutions that underwrite credit cards and insure bank accounts against losses, the time spent by those whose identities have been stolen is immeasurable, not to mention the anxiety it causes. A few facts about identity theft. An estimated 33% of adults in the US have been the victim of identity theft, more than twice the global average. Even if the measures you take personally to ensure your computing environment is secure are top-notch, we all have data about ourselves in many databases, from health insurance companies to banking providers to government agencies and on and on. A breach at one of these entities is all it takes to have your information put for sale on something called the dark web, which I'll get to later, where it can be copied and distributed to countless other criminals. Also, financial institutions have differing policies about how much you're protected as a customer or member in the event that your identity is stolen when bank accounts are emptied as opposed to credit cards being issued in your name. Excuse me just for 1 second. Increasingly, one of the attack methods allowing criminals to gain financially is that of ransomware. While not fraud per se, ransomware has been used to devastating effect over the last several years. I want to spend some time on this increasingly common danger, as it can be every bit as harmful to a person's financial well-being as some of the traditional cyber fraud tactics. Ransomware refers to a form of malware that is capable of encrypting files on an individual computer's hard drive or shared drives on a computer network, followed by a demand for payment to the attacker to receive the decryption key to unlock the files. If the owner of the files has not properly taken a backup of them, the choice is either to negotiate a ransom payment or live without them. Ransomware attackers expect the victim to negotiate and typically start at a high price. They also often demand payment in digital currency, more commonly known as cryptocurrency, that is untraceable and irrevocable once transferred. Typically, Bitcoin as that is the cryptocurrency most familiar to the public. The number of ransomware attacks in 2019 were estimated at nearly 200 million, with the vast majority affecting individual consumers. Corporations often don't report ransomware attacks or ransom payments made so as not to undermine their customers' confidence in their data security practices. Following are 2 examples of ransomware that have netted big paydays for cyber criminals or caused a lot of turmoil for those dealing with the fallout. In 2019, there were numerous attacks on municipalities across the United States. In Texas, there were 22 municipalities that all used the same IT services provider to support their government computer network operations. The service provider was using a vulnerable support tool to remotely connect to these municipalities' networks. The service provider itself was compromised, which then gave the attackers access to the respective cities' networks. Ransomware was installed across the different agencies' computers, and the attackers demanded $2.5 million collectively to unlock the files. Functions like the DMV and courts were impossible to operate until the networks were restored. The cities refused to pay the ransom and had to spend many hours painstakingly restoring what they could from backups they had taken. Another example, the city of Lake City, Florida was attacked, and in this case, the city leaders decided it would be more cost-effective to pay the ransom. A Bitcoin transaction in the amount of $460,000 was paid for the decryption key to the city's computer servers. When it comes to victims, while individuals are often targeted and inadvertently put a backdoor into their computers for hackers to steal information, the real prizes are target-rich corporations and government agencies that maintain databases on customers and citizens. If a hacker can successfully gain a foothold on a computer on a healthcare company's network, for example, and that computer is discovered to have a vulnerability that either has not been patched by the company's IT department or has not even been identified as a vulnerability, and thus there is no patch available, something known as a zero-day exploit, the cyber criminal can use that compromised computer as a launching point to probe for weaknesses on other computers on the network. So, how do these hackers gain access to these remote computers in the first place? As mentioned, phishing is the #1 method used by cyber criminals to gain a foothold on remote computers. For example, let's imagine a new employee in a customer service department receives an email that appears to come from the director of that department. The subject line of the email states that it is urgent and needs to be read immediately. The body of the email warns that fraudsters have been sending emails to the company masquerading as legitimate messages, but that actually have the potential to compromise network security. The sender asks that the employee click on a link to take a quick survey that aims to gather data on whether any emails that might look suspicious have been delivered to employees' inboxes. This makes perfect sense to the new employee. Of course, management would be interested to know if shady messages have appeared, and the new employee, wanting to be part of the solution and generally helpful, is happy to participate in the survey. He clicks on the survey link, answers the 3 questions in the survey, enters his username and password to verify he is an employee, and clicks finish and moves on with his day. It all seems perfectly legitimate. However, unbeknownst to this employee, simply by clicking on the link, he has installed a tiny program that isn't detectable by the computer's security application. And the program begins trying to install itself to every computer on the network. Additionally, he has just given away his credentials to the hackers. Each time it installs itself, it establishes an outbound connection to a server in, let's use Romania, for example, so that hackers across the world can send further commands to it. This is the ultimate goal of cyber criminal gangs, to assume command and control of vast computer networks and use them for criminal purposes. These purposes vary widely, from recording everything typed on the computer to extorting victims for money to unlock their personal or business files in ransomware attacks. Whatever the motivation for a particular attack, stolen data is always desirable for these groups. Cybercrime in the US costs companies and individuals billions of dollars annually in losses. In 2019, in the US alone, it is estimated that ransomware attacks by themselves cost upwards of $9 billion. The estimated total of all cybercrime in 2021 is expected to exceed $5 trillion globally. Cyber fraud is a large part of this total, made up of money stolen from bank accounts, stolen credit cards that are maxed out, social security fraud, tax return fraud, ransom payments, and the list goes on. Over the last several years, numerous corporations have gotten a black eye in the media for being careless with data security. But the picture isn't always as clear as it may seem at first. For example, one of the largest data breaches in the last decade occurred in 2013 at the retail giant Target. 40 million customers' debit and credit card numbers were stolen. Most people I know who heard about the story in the news and asked me about it assumed that the hackers were able to penetrate Target's firewall and directly start downloading the data. What actually happened was more sophisticated, however. Target used a third-party company to maintain their heating and cooling systems, and that vendor was set up with remote access into Target's network for the purpose of accessing the electronic components of the HVAC system. Similar to the example given of the 22 municipalities in Texas, the HVAC vendor had its system compromised, giving hackers a backdoor into Target's network. Once on the network, the hackers discovered there was no logical separation between the payment system and the rest of the network. Essentially, it was open season once they were in. They then proceeded to install a form of malware on the point of sale terminals throughout the network after testing it earlier during a busy shopping period. As customers' cards were used for purchases, the data was skimmed and collected by the malware and then later transmitted to other compromised computers in the US and elsewhere, where it could be downloaded by the suspected perpetrators in Russia and Eastern Europe. Another prominent example of the last decade. In 2017, the Equifax breach saw nearly 150 million Americans' private information stolen. A months-old web server vulnerability allowed this breach to happen. Equifax's IT security team even knew about the need to patch it, but just hadn't gotten around to doing maintenance. The hackers spent 76 days in Equifax's network before their access was finally cut off. They moved methodically around the company's network to steal data pieces at a time from across 51 servers to avoid raising alarms. As criminal undertakings go, it was a beautifully executed crime. These are but a few of the numerous data breaches that have occurred in recent history, all of which amount to a massive exposure of all of our data, making all of us vulnerable to further scams in the future. It's a giant headache for everyone involved. Companies lose their customers' trust, individuals lose peace of mind and perhaps money, and digital forensics teams work overtime trying to sort out how the perpetrators gained access in the first place. So where does all this stolen data end up? In the majority of cases, data obtained in a breach ends up being posted for sale on an area of the internet called the dark web. The dark web is the unindexed portion of the internet that traffics in all manner of content, much of it comprising criminal activity. It was created by the US government researchers as they sought to create an environment on the internet that could be used to shield our own intelligence agencies from being discovered when conducting intelligence gathering operations. While there are legitimate uses of the dark web, especially for citizens of repressive regimes where freedom of speech is not a fundamental right and they want to communicate ideas and opinions without fear of retribution, it is often used for fraudulent purposes. The less savory portion of the dark web is where you'll find illegal marketplaces run by cyber criminals, digital storefronts operated by those without respect for the law. It is impossible to police effectively, as all activity is carried out under cloak of aliases, using untraceable accounts, transacting in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, with traffic hidden and anonymized across many hops on the internet. On the dark web, one can find things such as databases of sensitive personal information for sale, stolen and cyber breaches from across many industries and government agencies, batches of credit card numbers stolen using a variety of techniques, from outright theft of a database over the internet to card skimming techniques used at point of sale terminals and ATMs, and ready to deploy malware attacks that can be purchased for little money by novices with no real programming skills themselves, which can wreak havoc on the target's computers once unleashed and which are designed to steal sensitive data. These items listed for sale can be added to a shopping cart on Amazon-like sites, with seller reviews even listed for establishing sources' credibility before purchasing. It is like the Wild West of the internet. While there have been prosecutions of a few sellers of stolen data when law enforcement can verify the true identity of those behind a particular site, the vast majority of sellers operate in countries that don't have a compelling interest to assist US-based law enforcement agencies in their investigations, allowing them to be virtually untouchable. Because we now live in a digital world, the lines between traditional financial crime, such as the manufacture of counterfeit currency or wire fraud, and cybercrime have been blurred. Nearly all financial fraud is carried out digitally now, making cyber fraud a top focus for law enforcement and government agencies. The Secret Service this year announced that it had merged its traditional financial crimes enforcement task force with that of its electronic crimes task force, giving rise to a new hybrid cyber fraud task force that will use all tools at its disposal in a unified manner when investigating financial crimes. The FBI and other agencies also have large groups of specialists that focus on digital forensics as part of financial crime investigations. Trying to locate the sources and methods of those who commit cyber fraud amounts to solving an incredibly complex digital puzzle whose pieces are constantly changing shape. These moving targets require coordination among agencies and countries if the good guys ever hope to get the upper hand in the fight against cyber fraud. That is the extent of what I wanted to address today. And on Thursday, I will be following up with specific techniques and applications that end users can use to help combat some of this scary landscape out there. Todd, do we have any questions?
You get unmuted there for a moment. Clicking on that, it wasn't wanting to unmute there for a moment. We don't have any questions at this point. We do have several individuals that are in our chat room. If you haven't opened up the chat room, please do so, and then you can post some of your questions. And maybe to lead off on this question, Q&A period for the time that we have remaining, you talked a lot about the phishing scams and the way that criminals can get into an organization. What are steps that organizations take, and maybe you could draw upon what we do here at CapEd to make sure that customer or member data is safe?
So that's a large question. One of the
Put me on the spot there.
Yeah. So as mentioned in my presentation, the best thing that anybody, whether it's an individual or corporation or an entity like CapEd, can do is to take a multi-layered approach. And essentially what that means is to have products or different applications from a variety of manufacturers that do different things and do them very, very well, and to not rely on one company for protecting all facets of data. That is probably the number one thing. The second thing that is true for employees of any organization or individuals at home is to educate yourself on exactly what are the most likely threats, what are the vectors of attack we all might be at risk of receiving, and to approach it logically, take it one step at a time. It's very, very simple. And I know this from many people that I talk to on a regular basis. It's very simple to become overwhelmed by just all of the jargon out there. And it seems like it's probably next to impossible to get a handle on how to fully protect yourself if you're not a so-called computer expert. And there is just a wealth of information on the internet by good guys who post all kinds of really great how-to articles on protecting your information, on best practices, and generally doing everything you can to the extent possible to protect yourself while on the internet.
Do you have any that you would refer folks that are watching today or catching this after fact and watching the recording of places or websites that you would recommend individuals use as they start to do their research?
I sure do, and actually, I'll be addressing that on Thursday, and I'll have a slide deck on Thursday that includes lots of links to applications, some free, some paid. I don't endorse any specific ones. I will just include those that I know are popular and work well.
So you're giving us a little
so I
bit
don't really want to get into that today.
You're giving us a little bit of bait to make sure that we tune in on Thursday. I like that. Good marketing there, Mr. IT guy. I like that. So
absolutely.
Another question that I often hear is, should I just stay off the internet? And I know that we'll probably cover that on Thursday. You know, as I've talked with individuals, I'm just, you know, I have an aged mother-in-law, and she says, I just don't want to get online. I just don't even want to deal with it. What would be your response to somebody that may ask that question?
I think it's probably next to impossible to stay off the internet entirely. However, there are still paper forms that can be presented in person at various entities if you wish to conduct yourself in that manner. There really is no putting the genie back in the bottle when it comes to the internet and personal security, data security. Whether you like it or not, if you don't have any social media accounts, you don't even want to go on the internet, your information is out there in myriad databases, whether it's in government agencies, your healthcare provider, and what have you. So your information is already at risk, and the common vectors, if you are not being compromised in your own home, are totally at the mercy of these other agencies, these other entities that house your data. So staying off the internet entirely is a bit like sticking your head in the sand if you think that that will protect you from completely having any sort of a future compromise of your data.
Good point. I hadn't thought about the fact that even though we or an individual may not be online, even the businesses they interface in an analog fashion are still collecting and holding data in a digital form. And that's an element of security that we can't control as individuals. Will you cover on Thursday some of the aspects that we should be asking companies that we engage with around what their cybersecurity protocols are?
Absolutely, that's an excellent point. I don't know to what extent all companies are going to willingly furnish that kind of information to you, especially as an individual consumer. But there are regulations that do require furnishing that data. And it is something that certainly as a consumer, it is wise to be aware of. There are certain companies that go the extra mile to protect your data, and they will happily share with you third-party validation of those measures that they put in place. And you can always vote with your wallet.
Well, we appreciate the information. I know that's a lot of consideration as it relates to what is cybersecurity, what are the challenges that are posted out there, what are businesses doing to be able to maintain their security for their customer or consumer data. I look forward to the presentation on Thursday. Again, we'll be back here Thursday at 12:15, and Toby will be talking about how can you as an individual, what steps can you do to protect yourself online. So we appreciate you, Toby. We appreciate your presentation and great information. I know it's a lot to consume. There are some words in there that I'll need to Google and figure out how to spell, but we appreciate that. With that, I don't see any other questions here in the chat. We appreciate all those who have joined us today. Again, at the top of the presentation, I encourage everybody to vote if they haven't already done so. Do take that opportunity to have you participate in your civic duty. And then we'll see you all back here on Thursday at 12:15 with Toby, talking about how to protect yourself while online. Thanks, Toby. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.